If you haven't discovered it yet, the fun in life is helping other people. I don't care what you do, whether you're a teacher or an accountant or an attorney or whatever you do. The real fun in life is not how much money you can make, it's how many people you can help, how much better you can make their lives. And you know, when I was growing up, my dad told me the way to really do that is to be a doctor. You can help more people by being a doctor than doing anything else. And I believed him until I became a doctor. And then what I found is what they taught me, unfortunately, the intentions were good, but doctors get sidetracked by the drug industry and the other money industries. And as a result, I was given tools that plain and simple do not work. And you know that. That's why your friends and relatives are still sick. If it worked, we wouldn't be having this conference because everybody would be well. So I was fortunate enough to learn a different way of dealing with things. But along the way, I've met some absolutely wonderful people. The Dairy Association teaches a tremendous amount of dishonesty, and the nice thing is that they're honest about their dishonesty, so to speak. If you go to the internet, you'll find a whole bunch of information about what the Dairy Association is up to. Before I get into this discussion, though, I want to make something absolutely clear, and it's that when I am talking about milk, I am not talking about mother's milk. I'm not talking about human breast milk. Human breast milk is absolutely essential for human babies. It's one of the three big crimes against society that's going on right now, and that is depriving mothers, not only here in this land, but in underdeveloped countries, of human breast milk, instead feeding them formula. The other two crimes against society are the tobacco industry, criminals, the tobacco industry, and also the meat and dairy industry, selling their goods, their poisons, their death, not only at home, but abroad in underdeveloped countries. Breast milk is absolutely essential for good health. If you fail to breastfeed your child, you're causing some problems that could be immediate, life-threatening, and also could be long-term. And these are real problems. In this country, by the way, if you fail to breastfeed in underdeveloped countries like India, rural Africa, rural Asia, then you cause even more severe problems. It's estimated that bottle feeding kills more than 1 million children a year across the world that would not have died if they would have had a message to breastfeed instead. You have 2 to 4 times the risk of crib death if you bottle feed your baby. You have 60 times more chance of that child developing pneumonia in the first 3 months of life. The child has a greater risk of going to the hospital during the first year of life, about 10 to 12 times. Reduced intelligence. The IQ is decreased if you bottle feed that baby. I often tell my mother, when she's sitting in the audience even, I'll say this. I'll say, Mother, if you would have breastfed me for more than 3 weeks, I'd have had Larry King's job. Behavioral and speech difficulties, problems early in life such as infections, asthma, eczema, type 1 diabetes, cancer, including lymphomas and leukemias, are increased early in life. And then later on, if you got a bad start in life, later on when you become an adult, there are other problems associated with bottle feeding, and that is a greater risk of heart disease, obesity, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, food allergies, ulcerative colitis, and Crohn's disease. So when I discuss the issues of milk, please do not get confused. Human breast milk is the only acceptable food for human babies. In fact, if I was Surgeon General of the United States, don't hold your breath, but if I was Surgeon General of the United States, one of the things that I would do is I would make formula a prescription item. A doctor would not be allowed to write this prescription unless he or she could justify it, just like narcotics, because we're talking about a life and death situation here. When I'm talking to you about dairy, I want you to realize that I'm talking about all kinds of dairy products. I'm talking about non-fat milk, I'm talking about kefir, I'm talking about yogurt, I'm talking about butter, I'm talking about cheese, I'm talking about cottage cheese, I'm talking about all the dairy products. So there may be some differences in the message I'm giving depending upon the amount of fat, the amount of protein involved in these particular dairy products, but you can pretty much generalize the story. The dairy industry, if you go to the internet, has a new campaign going. It's called Dairy Checkoff 2003. You can look it up. In fact, I encourage you to look some of the information up. Just jot some notes, look it up, see whether or not the things I'm telling you are easy to find. You'll find that they're right there. The dairy industry is supporting a $11 billion milk business and a $16 billion a year cheese business. And they have dedicated $165.7 million this year, 2003, to promoting dairy products. And this is their statement. This ongoing program area, referring to the section Dairy, Image, and Confidence, aims to protect and enhance consumer confidence in dairy products and the dairy industry. The major component involves conducting and communicating the results of dairy nutrition research showing the healthfulness of dairy products. Understand what they're saying. They are going to pay with that $167 million to get research to show benefits of their products. That's what they're paying for. That's what they'll get. They'll do anything to get those results. And I will show you what they're doing over the next few minutes. And the other thing that they're going to spend this money on is issues and crisis management. I am crisis management. And they know that. Now, cow's milk, the basic problem is that cow's milk was designed over, I don't know how long cows have been around. Well, let's just guess, 20 million years cows have been around. For 20 million years, or their predecessors, however long they were around, this evolution has gone on to develop this ideal food for baby cows called cow's milk. And they do a good job. They grow baby cows very well, and eventually a baby cow weighs, as an adult, 1,000 to 1,500 pounds and stands about 4.5 feet tall, and there are lots and lots and lots of cows in this country, like about 96 million cows. So it's working out really well, this cow's milk is for cows. But cow's milk is not the right food for people. Milk is specifically designed for a species of animal. And one of the qualities of the milk is that it has to fit the needs related to growth. So let's take a look at some figures here concerning growth of an animal compared to the protein content, which is vital to growth. You've got to have protein involved in the growth process. Let's take a look at the protein content based upon rate of growth. And rate of growth here is the amount of time that is required to double the size of the animal. So human breast milk has 1.2 grams per 100 milliliters, and the growth rate or doubling time is 6 months. Horses, 2.4, doubles in size in 60 days. Cows, 3.3, doubles in size in 47 days. Dog, 7.1, doubles in size in 8 days. And a rat, 11.8 grams per 100 cc's, and it doubles in size in 4.5 days. You see the connection there? This is a food that has a protein content ideal for an animal that doubles in size about 4 times as fast as we do. There are other nutritional qualities that fit ideally for a cow, but differ greatly from us. And that is the calcium content, for example. The calcium content of cow's milk is 4 times higher than the calcium content of human breast milk. Fits ideally for growing a cow, but it was absolutely unnecessary to have that kind of calcium load to grow a person. If it was necessary, then human breast milk would contain that amount of calcium. And so it is with the other nutrients. Cow's milk is supercharged because of the fact that you need to grow this animal very rapidly to a very large size. Makes sense. Milk is sold to people in this country as the ideal food to build strong bones. Now, I need to point out to you that originally milk was sold to you based upon the calcium content. And everybody in this room knows that the reason milk builds strong bones is because it's filled with calcium. And of course, bones have a lot of calcium in them, so it makes sense, right? Well, there was a problem that's developed, and that is that scientists started to think about this a little bit and look at the research a little more carefully. And even consumers have looked at this, and they've come to the conclusion that this really doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, the picture that you'd have to have in mind, believing that calcium is so important for bone growth, is you'd have to have this kind of thought process going on. You'd have to think, what I do to grow strong bones is I shove a lot of calcium in past my lips, through my esophagus, into my intestine, and if I shove it fast enough and hard enough, so I'll develop a high concentration in the intestine, which will push through the intestinal wall into the bloodstream and build up a high concentration of calcium in the bloodstream, and then it will get pushed into the bones and stuffed into the bones. That's what you have to believe. You have to believe the gut is a passive sieve. You know what a sieve is? Something you drain your spaghetti with, a sieve. It has no judgment, no control, just a sieve, and that's what the gut wall would be. By shoving this calcium in, it just goes right in through the bones, into the bones. Of course, that's nonsense. Not only would that never happen in nature, but it would be deadly if it did, because if you consumed the gallons of milk and the handfuls of calcium pills that are recommended, you would die. You would die from soft tissue calcification. Your kidneys would be calcified, your muscles would get calcified, your heart would get calcified, and you would die. So what we have instead of this passive sieve is we have a very intelligent gut wall. It is so intelligent that when you do silly things like take these large, extraordinary amounts of calcium, it will block the calcium out and save your life. If you do something at the other extreme, which is to take a lower amount of calcium, say you just eat plant foods, rice, corn, oranges, potatoes, and so on, well, it will do, that gut wall, is it'll go out and reach out into that food supply, and it'll grab that calcium and pull that calcium in very efficiently into the blood, and it will always meet your calcium needs. Now, how do I know it always meets calcium needs? Because I have searched, the World Health Organization has searched, the United States government has searched for a single case of calcium deficiency caused by a low calcium diet. And we have all come up empty-handed. There has never been a case of dietary calcium deficiency ever reported in the world literature. There is no such disease. And yet, billions of people live on diets that contain no dairy products, no Tums, no calcium pills, and they grow normal adult skeletons. How could they do that? You wouldn't believe that would be possible if you listened to the dairy industry, the calcium pill industry, would you? But your own observations say that what they're teaching you cannot be true. So if you find a case of dietary calcium deficiency, in other words, not enough calcium in a diet causes the disease, I'm the first one that knows, please, so I get to report it in the medical journal and become world famous. Okay, so the calcium bit didn't work, right? So the dairy industry now has to figure out another way to tell you how dairy products build strong bones. And those of you who are a little more sophisticated in this and have been reading the newspapers and some of the news articles, or more importantly the medical journals, you will see that now the dairy industry, as well as the pork and the beef industry, have figured out how their products build strong bones. What they are telling you is the reason that these foods that are high in protein build strong bones is a direct effect of the protein on the bones. The protein causes the bones to grow stronger. And they have put millions of dollars into that research to show you that. And millions more into the media to get the publicity spin so that the public will know about it. Let me talk to you about these two issues for a few minutes. The dairy industry now has a new campaign. It's called 3 a Day. 3 a Day for Stronger Bones. 3 dairy products a day for stronger bones. Do you know where they get that slogan from? You've heard of the 5 a Day program, which is a really good, legitimate program. It's now gone up to 9 a day because they know 5 a day of fruits and vegetables really isn't enough, but that's where they started. Now they're up to telling you to eat 9 a day. Pretty soon they'll be telling you something really radical like just eat fruits and vegetables, because that's what the truth is. Okay, so they have this 3 a Day campaign. Look at what they're advertising. This is one of their slogans. They're not just advertising skim milk, are they? They've got cheese and milk and yogurt and ice cream and whatever. They're just anything. If you look at the ads to tell you to build strong bones, they're telling you to consume not just low-fat products, but any of their products. Any advertisements you see for osteoporosis. And you might stop and think for a minute. You might say, now listen, I see a little problem here. I hear the Heart Association and other organizations telling me that I should avoid these high-fat, high-cholesterol foods because they'll give me strokes, heart attacks, adult-type diabetes, obesity, colon cancer, breast cancer. What a dirty, rotten trick. To get a necessary nutrient, calcium, I have to risk my life. And you start thinking, maybe there's something wrong here. Maybe my Creator didn't make a horrible mistake. You see the problem here? If you believe that the human being was designed correctly in an environment that is supposed to support the human being, then how could you have such a contradiction exist? How could you have a recommendation that will give you breast cancer and heart disease, yet is necessary to grow strong bones? It makes no sense. Was our Creator out to lunch? Maybe at McDonald's. Maybe he had that cerebral disease that S was talking about. Okay, so that's the new plan, 5 a day. First thing I want to point out to you is that calcium is a mineral. It comes from the ground. Always remember that. It comes from the ground. Calcium does not come from milk originally. Does not come from plants originally. Where it comes from is from the ground. All your minerals, copper, manganese, iron, potassium, sodium, all these minerals that you're so busy talking about and many of you are taking supplements for, all of these minerals come from the ground. The way they get into all animals is they dissolve in watery solutions. The roots of plants take these minerals up from these watery solutions, incorporate the minerals in the roots, leaves, flowers, stems, and fruits, leaves, flowers, stems. Anyway, all the parts of the plants, and it's got to be another part. And what we do as animals, or other animals do, is they go and eat the parts of the plants, right? No animal eats ground, except for a 2-year-old. So what we want to do is we want to get the minerals from the more original source. We're not going to eat ground, so what's the next choice? Plants. Plants are so sufficient in minerals that mineral deficiency is almost non-existent in the world, with 2 exceptions. And those are iodine deficiency, and in very rare cases, selenium deficiency, and maybe a third, maybe very, very, very rare cases, zinc deficiency, but nothing you ever have to worry about. These are very isolated situations. If you want to read more about the mineral and the vitamin issue, in last month's newsletter on my website, I wrote about vitamins and minerals and why I don't recommend them. Okay, so that's where the original source of calcium is from. We should go to that original source, and as I mentioned, you always get enough if you go to that original source. Let's take a look at some of the recommendations that have been given in the scientific literature for our calcium intake, just to help you focus on the problem here. If you look at the research that was done, the basic research, and the basic research, if you look at science and you study it as I have, and I've studied the science well over 100 years of scientific research, what you find is the really basic stuff was done back in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. We build upon that, but the basic research was done back then. The basic research shows that a person, whether that person is nursing or pregnant, requires 150 to 200 milligrams of calcium a day. That's it. The average calcium intake in underdeveloped countries is 300 to 500 milligrams a day. Try and remember some of these figures. Calcium intake for the average American is 500 to 600 milligrams a day. World Health Organization. World Health Organization, that's responsible for the nutritional needs of most people on this earth, recommend 400 to 500 milligrams a day. But industry-influenced organizations in this country recommend amounts such as 1,000 to 1,300 milligrams a day from the U.S. Food and Nutrition Board, and the National Institutes of Health, 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams a day. Ask yourself, you see these figures, you ask yourself, how in the world could we have recommendations all the way from 150 to 1,500 milligrams a day? How could such numbers exist? The only way such numbers could exist is if calcium intake has little or nothing to do with the health of the bones. And that's what the truth is, and I'll show you how that works in just a second. The dairy industry has influenced, no, excuse me, let me say it correctly. The dairy industry has paid for almost all of the research studying the effects of calcium on bone health. Okay? You'll find it, if you look, whenever I read a study, I'll tell you the first thing that I do is I look for who funded it. And if you read the studies that are discussed over the next few minutes and the ones that are in this particular paper, which is in the September 2000 issue of the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and you take and pull the studies out of the library and look at the funding, you'll find almost every one of these studies were paid for by the dairy industry. Interesting. The investigators that published this paper in September of 2000, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, they found 57 studies that talk about the benefits of dairy products on bone health. 57, that's all, just 57. And when they looked at the quality of study design, they decided that only 21 were worth really considering. 21 studies on the effects of dairy products on bone health. You would have thought, considering the bragging that's going on, the advertising budget that goes for dairy products every year, that they'd have thousands of studies that support the benefits, wouldn't you? No, there are 21 studies that were properly designed to test the benefits of cow's milk on bone health. Of those studies, 57, believe me, understand that they were paid for by the dairy industry, yet 57 showed no benefit from cow's milk on bone health, 29% were favorable, and 14% actually showed that cow's milk hurt the bones. Okay, now there's a particularly well-respected kind of study among doctors and scientists. It's called a randomized controlled study. That's where you take one group of people that you have tried to make as similar as the other group of people, and you do something to this one group, which we call the experimental group, and you don't do anything to the other group. So we have a control here, and we do something experimentally to this one group. There are only 7 studies that have been published in the literature on the effect of cow's milk that use this design. 7 studies. Now, of those 7 studies, only 1 tested the effect of fluid cow's milk on postmenopausal women, which are the subjects that are most likely to develop osteoporosis. And that one study, which was published in 1985, shows that cow's milk hurts the bones, and it was paid for by the national dairy industry. It was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in February of 1985. You can go look it up. You can read the funding. You can read the study, but read the study very carefully. Dr. Esselstyn, he brought me a copy of this study yesterday, and he said, you know, I'm looking at this study, and I'd like you to point out the different areas that you're talking about, because you've been very, very verbose and critical of this particular study. Well, you have to understand who paid for the study, and you'll have to understand that it was employees of the dairy industry that did the study. So when they wrote up the particular language in the study, they did the best they could to cover up the bad news. So what you have to do is you have to, as I pointed out, he actually has the study with him. I don't know, maybe it's in his room, but he had it with him yesterday. And I just went through and I circled all the areas. There they are. There's the facts. There's the data. All you have to do is look at the data. You just can't read the nonsense that went on in the study. And by the way, I'm not the only one that can read the study. You'll see the colleagues of Ricker and Haney also can read the study, and they were very critical of them in the same terms that I'm going to tell you about right now. They were very critical of them if you read the letters to the editor. Okay. So what Ricker and Haney did is they set up a study where they took postmenopausal women. Why postmenopausal women? They're the most likely ones to get osteoporosis, right? And then what they did is they fed them 3 8-ounce glasses of milk a day. 3 8-ounce glasses of skim milk a day. Why skim milk? Because they didn't want them to die of heart disease before the experiment was over. And then they measured the outcome. And what they found was the average amount of calcium consumed was over 1,400 milligrams a day, you know, as high as anybody recommends. They found that these women consuming the supplemented milk, the 3 8-ounce glasses of skim milk a day, were still in negative calcium balance. That means they lost more calcium in their urine and their feces than they absorbed through their gut. And then when you look at the charts at the end of the study, you find that those who got the milk lost twice as much bone as those who didn't get the milk. They will never do that study again. It's been 20 years since this study was done, and they will never, ever do it again. Now, Ricker and Haney, they say the following things in their particular article. I just want to go over these 2 statements for you because they're very pertinent to what we're going to talk about in just a minute. They said the protein content of the milk supplement may have a negative effect on calcium balance, possibly through an increase in kidney losses of calcium or through a direct effect on bone resorption. Focus on those words. Protein having a detrimental effect on the calcium. Don't forget those words, because the dairy industry's forgot them. This may have been due to an average 30% increase in protein intake during the milk supplementation. It says right there in their paper. What causes osteoporosis? The bones are designed to last a lifetime. Your bones aren't designed to dissolve when you're 40, 50, or 60 years old. They're designed to last you for 85 years. Strong, to carry you around, to do all the activities that a normal woman or man is supposed to do. So this has to be a disease. There has to be something wrong. We have to be living by the wrong set of rules. The wrong set of rules is the fact that we are eating a diet not intended for human beings. This is a diet that we did not evolve upon, as has been discussed by all of the people that you've heard over the last 2 days. It is a diet that has qualities that may be fit for a cat or a Tyrannosaurus Rex or maybe a dog, but it certainly is not fit for a human being. And one of the more serious problems with this kind of diet is that it's full of acid. if you take food and you grind it up in a grinder, and you take a pH tester, some way to test the acid-base balance, neutral is 7, below neutral is acid, above neutral is alkaline. So you stick your little meter in there and you measure the acid in the food. You find that certain foods are very acidic. These are things like cheese. Parmesan cheese is the most acidic of all foods commonly consumed. Poultry, fish, seafood of various kinds, all your animal products are loaded with acid. Your alkaline foods are your fruits and vegetables. Grains are a tiny bit acidic. People will tell you don't eat grains because they're acid. Just a little bit acidic. And people who live on grain diets, by the way, do very well as far as bone strength is concerned. But I won't get off on that particular tack unless we have to later. So what happens is we eat all of this acid on the American diet. Now the body maintains a slightly alkaline pH. We're a little bit above 7 if you measure the blood acid. When we eat acid, what happens is the body has to neutralize that acid. Why? Because pH has to be maintained precisely. If it isn't, then other chemical reactions in the body don't work. You get very sick. So the body maintains pH, and it does it by neutralizing all that acid. Well, how does it neutralize the acid? The primary buffering system of the body is the bones. The bones dissolve. They release bicarbonates and other kinds of alkaline materials which neutralize the acid, and that's how you lose your bones. You essentially pour acid on them, and they dissolve. When we look around the world, what we find is a direct correlation between animal protein intake and hip fractures. You see countries that consume a very alkaline diet, a very vegetarian kind of diet, like in Papua New Guinea or rural Africans or people in Asian countries, have very low risks of hip fracture. As you move up the economic scale and you look at countries that are wealthier, you see higher protein intakes and higher hip fracture rates. We've been taught that the problem is not protein. In fact, protein's never mentioned except now in a positive tone. We are taught the problem is not enough calcium. Well, let's take a look at the worldwide picture, and you see if you look at increasing calcium intake worldwide, the more calcium consumed in a country, the higher the rate of hip fractures. The only way that that data can exist is if calcium has little or nothing to do with the strength of the bones. And that's what the truth is. You cannot get around this data. You cannot deny this data. You cannot argue against this data. We've been doing experiments for many years on this subject, but they really got intense about it in the early 80s. And all the basic experiments done on bone strength in terms of calcium intake and protein were done in the early 80s. And what they did is they set up various research projects. The first column there, you see the initials of the principal investigator in case you want to look up the particular study. And in the second column, you see the amount of calcium that was consumed by the subject in that study. And then what they did is they put them either on a low protein or a high protein diet. When they put the subject on a low protein diet, which is about 85 grams of protein a day, we eat about 75, 85, maybe 95 grams of protein a day. It's about in our area of protein. Plus, by the way, our protein intake is very alkaline. And then they do the calcium balances. What they do is they just measure the calcium in the urine and the feces, and they subtract that from the amount of calcium that you eat. And you get the calcium balance. Well, when you're on a low protein diet, you're in positive calcium balance on a diet of 500 milligrams of calcium. You're still in a positive calcium balance on 1,400 milligrams of calcium. If you eat a high protein diet, which is typical of Americans, the ranges were 140 to 150 grams of protein a day. Even when you're consuming 1,400 milligrams of calcium a day, you're still in negative calcium balance. The moral of the story is no matter how much calcium you consume, you will not correct the problem until you deal with the cause, which is the high protein, high acid American diet. All the mechanisms for this are worked out. Interesting report in National Geographic in 1987. They had an opportunity to see the effects of protein on bone health of people that lived many years ago. There were a couple of women who were sitting in a hut 5 centuries ago, and an ice floe fell on top of them and preserved them for 500 years. They discovered these ladies in Alaska, estimated their age was 20 and 40 years of age. On autopsy, they found that they showed signs of severe osteoporosis, and also they suffered from atherosclerosis. And in the National Geographic article, they say this was the result of a heavy diet of whale and seal blubber. This is no mystery. And this is not a problem of modern society. The Eskimo that was studied, the traditional Eskimo, was studied again, and their results were published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition about 30 years ago in 1974. They looked at Eskimos and they checked their bone density, and they found that after the age of 40, Eskimos had 10 to 15% greater bone loss than Americans of comparable age. Yeah. And that's in the face of the fact that the Eskimos consuming all those fish bones eat on the average 2,500 milligrams of calcium a day. But they also eat 250 to 400 grams of protein a day in the form of whale, seal, fish, and other animal products. Okay, so what is the dairy industry going to do? What they're going to do is they're going to counter all of this negative publicity on protein, because it's absolutely crystal clear. 100 years of research is absolutely crystal clear that protein and the acid associated with the protein is what's damaging and destroying the bones. So they've got to counter it. So what they have done is they've set up their own experiments. And these experiments start with an initial observation. And that is that in our society, people who eat diets low in dairy products have the worst bones. Now, who are those people who eat diets low in dairy products? They are the less fortunate people in our society who live on sodas and other unhealthy foods. They are very unhealthy, very overweight. They're the sickest people in our society. And so they make the conclusion, or they try and get you to believe, based on this observation, that the most unfortunate people in our society who also happen to consume less dairy products also have the worst bones. And that's why you're to believe that the problem is lack of dairy products, and they also go on to say, well, that's because of a lack of protein. All right. So how do they set up experiments to prove this to you? And there are about 12 experiments so far published. And you will notice down the right-hand corner, paid for by the National Dairy Association or the pork industry or the livestock industry or so on. Please note that when you read the study. This is the way you do it. And by the way, this was published for you if you want to read how it's done. It was published for you in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, May of 2003. This is no mystery to my colleagues. Scientists know all of these shenanigans. What you do is you set up an experiment where you look at a population of people who eats lots and lots and lots of vegetables. And they eat protein too. And then what you find is those who eat a little bit more protein have a little stronger bones. Well, with all those vegetables, what they're doing is they're neutralizing the acid in the diet of these people. And then the other way you set up your experiment is you take groups of people, you put them in a house, you put them in a laboratory situation, and you feed these people various amounts of protein, but you also feed them antacids like Citracal, and you neutralize the acid from the protein. And then what you find is more protein causes more bone growth. They finally got it, don't they? Okay. But the story isn't complete unless they can tell it all. And so what they've had to do is they've had to figure out a way that that protein stimulates bone growth. And this was touched on by Dr. Bernard on Friday night. What they have brought into play is a factor called insulin-like growth factor 1. Insulin-like growth factor 1 is a very powerful growth hormone. It's responsible for growth throughout our entire life. And insulin-like growth factor 1 will promote bone growth. When you feed protein to people, what happens is you increase the amount of insulin-like growth factor 1 in their bodies, and you increase bone growth. And you can actually see that only if you neutralize the acid first. Okay? You can also increase insulin-like growth factor 1 even more by increasing the amount of recombinant growth factor, recombinant bovine growth factor that they put into milk, and they do that, as some of you know and are very concerned about. They put it in milk to increase milk production. So when you put this into the cows in the production process, the milk that they produce also has more IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. And by the way, it is not destroyed by pasteurization. The end result is published actually in 2 studies. Dr. Bernard showed you about one of them. There were actually 2 studies published, one on adolescent girls, and the other one was published, as he told you about last Friday night, on postmenopausal women. And what they show is when you feed milk to women, either adolescents or postmenopausal, you increase their insulin-like growth factor 1 levels by 10%. So now the dairy industry has the mechanism for bone growth by feeding dairy products. Now, they're not going to tell you all the details, like you got to neutralize the acid first, but now they got it. Unfortunately, they're going to be people like myself and some of the other folks here who are going to tell you the rest of the story. And the rest of the story is that insulin-like growth factor 1 is the strongest cancer promoter that people have identified. Not only do you grow body tissue, but you also grow cancer with insulin-like growth factor 1. It grows breast and colon and prostate and lung cancer tremendously. It prevents cell death, which you don't want to happen when you're growing cancer cells, and it increases cell proliferation. It is a very powerful cancer stimulator. When we talk about milk, one of the things that your friends will say is, okay, I understand that milk's not good for me. I understand that it's not good for me because it's high in fat, but I've solved that problem. I have now changed my consumption from regular milk to low-fat milk or skim milk. And they feel real good about that. They feel like they've solved their problems. They've taken the fat out, a lot of the cholesterol out. But let's look at what they've really actually done. If you look at these figures up here, you see when you switch from whole milk to low-fat milk, you change the fat content from 50% to 31%. You say, well, how can that be? It's not 50%. I read the carton. I go to the store. I read the carton. It says milk, 3.5% fat. Whole milk, 3.5% fat. Well, that's 3.5% fat by weight. You see, milk is just a whole gallon of water, and by weight, 3.5% of it's fat, but nobody eats food by weight. None of you eat a 5-pound diet. You eat a 2,000-calorie diet. The denominator for all discussions in science of nutrition is calories, not weight. So of the calories in the milk, half of them are fat in whole milk. And low-fat milk, which is 2% milk, 30% of them are fat. And when you get down to skim milk, they're actually really low in fat. But what do you do to the other substances in the milk when you take the fat out? Remember, you have to ultimately end up with 100% as far as the total calories. So what happens to the relative concentrations of the other nutrients in milk, the other macronutrients? Well, the protein goes from 21 to 28 to 41% protein. So what you've done is you may have helped the arteries. You may have, and you really haven't. I'll get to those in a minute. You may have helped the arteries a little bit, but you've, of course, damaged the bones. And you've created a situation where you get kidney stones. Those bones, by the way, that you've lost, they pass out of the body through the kidneys, they solidify, and that's how you get kidney stones. And also you increase the amount of carbohydrate in the diet from 30% to 57% when you go from whole milk to skim milk. The dairy industry has targeted children, and this is one of the areas that we're going to go after them, is in their efforts to target children concerning the importance of cow's milk. They tell you it's necessary for growth, it's necessary for bones, it actually is essential. And can you imagine raising a child without cow's milk? You'll get criticism from grandma, from your mother-in-law, from your pediatrician. I'm not joking, you will. You could even be accused of child abuse to raise your child without cow's milk. And I'm sure some of you hesitate. I'm sure you do. I'm sure even though you know better, not only because of what you are hearing from me today, but from what you've heard before, the emotional impact is so great. The brainwashing is so dominant that they've changed our minds to, even when we know the facts, we still gut down inside, we know that we have to consume this cow's milk for our children's health, and we're afraid to take them off the cow's milk. That's a deadly kind of thinking. And I'll try and show you why and hopefully give you enough information so that when those emotions come up, you'll be able to fight them a little bit and you'll be able to do the right thing for your children and grandchildren. From the dairy industry on the internet, the goal is to guide school-age children to become lifelong consumers of dairy products. 2003 activities will target students, parents, educators, and school food service professionals. Similar words have been said by the tobacco industry. You've heard the exact statement. We're going to hook them when they're young, and we're going to keep them on for life. And that's what they're doing. They tell you right there on the internet. Annual fluid milk consumption among kids 6 to 12 increased to 28 gallons per capita, the highest level in 10 years. Children under 18 consume 46% of the milk in this country. Let's talk about some of the problems. One of the problems I like to start about is just how lily white this stuff is. You know, not all the white color comes from the calcium. Some of it comes from the white blood cells. White blood cells are commonly known as pus cells. Okay, they're the cells that occur when you get a pustule on your hand. They're called white blood cells. Now, the dairy industry, they got standards. Okay, the standards are published in 1993, is that you cannot have more than 750,000 pus cells per cc of milk, or you can't sell it. Aren't they good? In New York, the milk was analyzed just a couple of years ago, and they found that the average was 363,000 pus cells per cc. A cc, by the way, is a third of an ounce. And they had 24,000 bacteria per cc. Truth in advertising would demand that when one of those movie stars or sports figures appeared in an ad with a milk mustache, that they had an arrow pointing toward it saying contains 250,000 pus cells and 25,000 bacteria. They won't do it. Dairy products were the foods most often recalled by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration from the period of October 1st, 1993 through September 30th, 1998. For problems such as Salmonella staphylococci, Listeria, deadly E. coli, you know, the one that kills the kids and some adults, Mycobacterium paratuberculosis, which some people believe causes Crohn's disease. But I want to talk to you, I want to get your emotional juices going. I want you to leave here really thinking about some of the things that are really disgusting. Because threatening you with obesity and heart disease and diabetes just hasn't worked so far. So I'm just going to have to get real rotten here. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the problems that I see that are never discussed. But you can look this up. Just go to the internet. Go to the National Library of Medicine. Dairy cattle in Western countries are infected, all over the world, not just Western countries, with two very interesting viruses. They're called bovine immunodeficiency virus, which is also known as bovine AIDS virus, and also bovine leukemia viruses. Let's look at some of the statistics here. In the United States, results show on average 40% of the beef herds and 64% of the dairy herds are infected with bovine immunodeficiency virus. Now that's an old figure. That's probably 20 years old. It's much higher now. Probably similar to these figures. In Canada, the infection rate is 70%. In Argentina, the rate is 84% for the leukemia virus in their cattle. Herds infected with BIV are usually infected with BLV. The reason is because of the care of the cattle. They use the same dehorning instruments. They use the same syringes from cow to cow. They feed them pooled colostrum. In other words, they take the early milk from the cows, they mix it in big vats from a whole bunch of cows and feed it to a whole bunch of calves. And then one practice that I found rather interesting, it was a USA Today article about 2 months ago, front page, USA Today, front page. They talked about the mad cow issue and how in the United States we banned feeding offal to cows. You know what offal is? It's not A-W-F-U-L, it's A-F-O-L. Okay, we don't feed offal to cows anymore. Offal is dead cows. 17% of the cow food used to be dead cows. Well, we don't do that anymore because Oprah Winfrey, she made a big stink about this, and of course the Howard Lyman cattleman suit followed and so on. But one of the positive upshots of this is they made it against the rules to feed dead cows to cows. But you can still feed dead cows to chickens, and you can feed dead cows to pigs. And of course, you can take the excrement from the chickens and you can scoop it up and make pellets out of it and feed it to the cows. And whatever goes through the chicken and spills out of the chicken's mouth and lands in the cow excrement, you can make the pills out of that too and feed it to the cows, pellets. And it doesn't exclude cow blood either. You go to the slaughterhouse and you can scoop up the blood from the slaughterhouse and you make formula for the baby cows out of the blood from the cows. That's USA Today front page. So anyway, that's how you get such high rates of infection with these viruses. Both viruses can cross species lines, thus infecting other animals. So for example, you can take the viruses and you can feed them to goats, sheep, chimpanzees. They get infected, they get sick. I was doing a radio show one year, many years ago. I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and there was a scientist on with me, and I was talking about this kind of research. He said, you know, we did this at Emory University. We did this research. So, you know, the darndest thing, you take these viruses out of the cow's milk and you inject them into the chimpanzee or the goat or whatever, and they don't get sick. You got to give it by mouth to make them infected. I said, boy, that's the darndest thing. Nationwide and worldwide, leukemia is more common in higher dairy consuming populations. Yeah. And 4 studies that are published show an increased, and as far as I know, no studies show the opposite, an increased incidence of leukemia has been found among dairy farmers in 4 different studies. BIV infection has been reported in 1 person. Why just 1 person? Well, who's looking for it? You know? Why bother? What? You know, if they took 100th of the amount of money spent to try and convince you that cow's milk was good for your bones, and they spent that looking for people infected with bovine leukemia and bovine AIDS virus, you might find entirely startling results, but you will not know in the near future. The bovine leukemia virus has been classified in the same groups as human T-cell leukemia, lymphotropic viruses, which are known to cause leukemia and lymphomas in people. Same classification. And bovine immunodeficiency virus is structurally and genetically closely related to human immunodeficiency virus. For a while, they couldn't tell the 2 apart. They're so close. Pasteurization kills many types of microorganisms, but it's not foolproof. You see how sometimes the milk escapes pasteurization. And there's also this concern, which is kind of interesting. The way these viruses work, they're called retroviruses, and they incorporate into your own genetic material, into your DNA, or your RNA and DNA. Okay, so these retroviruses that are in the leukemia virus, the RNA that's in the leukemia virus, what they're worried about is that when you pasteurize the milk, you break those RNA chains into smaller fragments that are now more infectious, more easily incorporated into your own DNA. That's one of the concerns. You've all heard about feline leukemia virus. This should not surprise you. You take your cat to the veterinarian to get an immunization for feline leukemia virus. Why should it surprise you that leukemia in humans can be an infectious disease? It's all too obvious. Now, has it been proved? Has it been proved? No. Nobody's looking at it. Nobody's researching it. Nobody's really all that interested in it. But it serves a point to tell you about it. Next time you pour your child or grandchild a tall, cool glass of leukemia virus, you're going to think about me. Milk is promoted to children. An interesting study published in the New England Journal of Medicine back in October of 1998 really brought to point something I used to see as a general practitioner back before I became an internist, and that was all the suffering that the kids went through in terms of bowel function. I'd see these kids come in, usually, you know, always brought by their mother, and the mother would bring them in usually because they had bloody bowel movements. And I'd start questioning the mother about the bowel function. Was the kid's constipated? No, the kid's not constipated. Just have blood in the stool. Well, tell me about the bowel function. Well, it's normal. Bowel function is normal. Well, kind of tell me a little bit more about it. Well, you know, it goes in the bathroom. Well, how long? Well, you know, just like me. You know, I get to read, you know, 3, 4 stories in Reader's Digest. It's terrible, terrible what happens to these kids. Can you imagine the poor little children that I saw, and then those of you who are physicians and those of you who are parents have seen, the children suffering with pain and fissures and abdominal pain and bloody bowel movements. Do you know, if you cause these things, including the headaches and the arthritis and the acne and the obesity, if you cause these things to children with a stick, they throw you in jail. But because people cause them with a fork and spoon, it's okay. But the pain is just as real. So anyways, they looked at these kids, and 65 kids severely constipated. How do you get classified as severely constipated? Well, you had a bowel movement every 3 to 15 days with the help of a laxative often. And often the laxatives were ineffective. Every 3 to 15 days, they took these children, they took them off cow's milk. 68% of them found complete relief of the constipation by going off cow's milk. They biopsied the bowel. They found evidence of inflammation of the bowel. They found anal fissures, pain. And then they put the kids back on the cow's milk, and that was 8 to 12 months later, and within 5 to 10 days, all of the children became severely constipated. You know, this isn't just 68 children in this study. These are the kids in your neighborhood that have these problems. Snotty nose and ear infections. You look around the neighborhood, and the kids are going to the doctor every month for ear infections, snotty nose. They also have gastroesophageal refluxes, asthma, eczemas, all kinds of problems that are caused by the dairy products. Why? Because it's a natural thing to consume cow's milk, and they get allergic kind of reactions. Another one of those interesting allergic kind of reactions is not as painful, acutely painful, as constipation. You know, it's not as obvious as a snotty nose, but it's certainly a lot more devastating, and that's type 1 diabetes. That's where the child's pancreas is destroyed. You want to talk about a nightmare for a family. Yeah, you do this to a family. You cause one child to have type 1 diabetes, and that child now has to take insulin every day of their life. They're rushed to the hospital quite often because of low blood sugar reactions. You worry day and night about the child, what the child eats, whether the child took the insulin, on, and about the child dying because these kids don't do well. I mean, they live, they're alive, but within 11 to 17 years, most of them suffer major complications like blindness, kidney failure, heart disease. It's not a great life. In part because they're diabetic and they're weakened people, but in part because the recommendations from the American Diabetic Association and almost every physician in this country is to feed a diet that kills people without diabetes to diabetics. And they fall apart at a horrendous rate. Okay, so the information concerning type 1 diabetes and cow's milk consumption has really gotten to the point where the American Academy of Pediatrics has made a statement on this, so you know it has to have gotten great, the evidence. And you can read this evidence in one of my previous newsletters if you want to find all of the facts that support this. But the American Academy of Pediatrics wrote a policy statement from one of their work groups in 1994, which still stands today. And that is early exposure of infants to cow's milk protein may be an important factor in the initiation of beta cell destructive processes. That means the insulin-producing cells of the pancreas in some individuals. And the avoidance of cow's milk protein in the first several months of life may reduce later development of insulin-type diabetes or delay the onset in susceptible people. You take the fat out of the milk and you still have to deal with the protein. I just want to go through just some of the diseases that you can find caused by or contributed to or associated with dairy products, particularly dairy protein. And you can go to the National Library of Medicine. When you leave here today, you can go home tonight, you can go to the National Library of Medicine, which is www, of course, .nlm for National Library of Medicine, .nih for National Institutes of Health, .gov. And you just put in cow's milk and one of these problems, and you will pull up articles about this. You'll pull up articles about loss of appetite, growth retardation, canker sores, reflux problems, bloody painful bowel movements, as we talked about, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. You'll pull up articles about snotty noses and ear infections. You'll pull up articles about rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. We have a nice lady in here who came up and talked to me. She's been on a program of no animal products for 3 weeks. She was crippled 3 weeks ago with rheumatoid arthritis and swollen joints, unable to function and really do anything, turn the keys on her car. So 3 weeks now, and she's almost fully pain-free. Now, that's great for an adult, and I take care of lots of adults, and I told you about 70% of the people that we take care of are either cured or dramatically improved, and not just published by our work, but others' work. But you ought to see what happens to a kid who gets juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, basically the same disease. These little kids, they get so sick, their joints get so inflamed, they don't grow. And so they end up about this big. They look like refugees from a war camp, and they're usually in wheelchairs. They have little tiny chins, and they're all shriveled up. And they live about 20 years. And I've had 2 cases of those children that I simply took them off the milk and put them on a healthy diet, and they were completely cured of the disease. Various kinds of rashes and eczemas, nervous system problems like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, autism, schizophrenia. I know you think this is too much to believe. Go to the National Library of Medicine. Look at the studies. Problems like bedwetting. This is a fun one to treat, and I get letters all the time about this. What I will hear is stories about how they have been faithfully taking their child to the psychiatrist every month to correct this problem of bedwetting. That's probably related to some sexual act that they didn't remember occurring with a child, you know, some mishandling or something. Terrible guilt in the family. This goes on 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 20 years sometimes. The child wets his or her bed. What's happening here is the cow's milk goes through the gut wall into the bloodstream and is excreted through the kidney system into the bladder. In the bladder, the cow's milk causes a reaction like a hive. The inside lining of the bladder swells. You now have a swollen edematous bladder wall that is insensitive. So the child can't feel the urine buildup in the bladder, so the child goes to bed at night. Everything's fine. Next thing the child notices wet bed sheets because they never had the urge to get up and go to the bathroom. They never knew the bladder was full because of the swelling that occurs due to the dairy product. Take the kid off the milk, the problem is solved. I can't tell you. In fact, I would be hard-pressed to tell you the number of children I have seen fail with this kind of approach. So you want to cut the psychiatric bills to zero? Take them off the cow's milk. Other kinds of problems like nephrotic syndrome, glomerulonephritis, I talked to you about SIDS. It goes on and on and on. But that doesn't faze the dairy industry. The dairy industry is busy building their marketing scheme. In fact, they have the American School Fund Service Association working with them to sell more cow's milk products, and it's working. It's working. They have now the school milk pilot test program, and what they're trying to do is sell more milk to kids. The kids are not drinking enough milk. So what do? They make it strawberry milk and chocolate milk, and they put it in fancy cartons, and they do everything they can to get the kids to drink more milk, and it's succeeding. They tell you to take the Coke machines out of the schools. Good. But what are they replacing them with? Something worse, which is the milk machines. Oh, that's radical. Okay, let's talk about the weight loss campaign by the national dairy industry. This is just a really fun one. All right, Dr. Greg Miller. Some of you know Dr. Greg Miller. Dr. Greg Miller is a PhD, Doctor of Nutrition. He is the the PR person for the dairy industry. He's the big honcho, Greg Miller is. I've known Greg Miller for 15 years or so. First time I met him, he was on my television show. What happened is I had Virgil Hulse on my show first. Virgil Hulse is a PhD, MD, head of, he was, a milk inspector for the state of California. And we started talking about the leukemia and the AIDS virus. This was 15 years ago. About the mad cow disease. Nobody heard about mad cow then. We were talking about the mad cow. All the other problems with dairy products. Well, the dairy industry got a little upset. This was a national TV show. And so they called up and said, we'd like to have our equal time. My producer said, fine, but McDougall will be on the set with you. So they sent Greg Miller down there. And so Greg Miller comes in and to give his presentation, and I was there, and I just went through the whole rap, you know, the eczema, the heart disease, the cancer, the leukemia, all, you know, the whole thing. And the audience is waiting for his response, and he's saying nothing, just kind of shaking his head. And about 10 minutes into the presentation, he reaches into his pocket and pulls out his wallet. Says to the camera, come over here. Look at this. See those? Those are my 2 kids. Do you think if dairy was bad, I'd give it to my kids? That was his entire argument for half an hour. I kid you not. We show, by the way, it's at our clinic. We show those 2 TV shows. Lots of folks like to show them. Various vegetarian organizations show them because they watch one show with Virgil Hulse and I, and they say there has to be a response from the dairy industry, and they come back the next week to see the response, and they leave shaking their heads. They can't do any better than that. Okay, let's look at what Greg Miller says about dairy products and weight. The new campaign is dairy products are designed for weight loss. Independent research confirming dairy's role in weight loss reduction is mounting, says Greg Miller. This helps to position dairy foods as part of the solution of America's growing obesity epidemic, informing the public that dairy's role in the fight against obesity will help increase consumption of milk, cheese, yogurt, among other dairy products. When did cow's milk become an anti-obesity drug? Cow's milk is designed to grow a cow from 60 pounds to 600 pounds. But all of a sudden, it's designed to cause weight loss. But let's look at the research. This research was reported by the dairy industry in one of their national meetings. Here's the publication. 1 of 17 randomized studies found weight loss in people taking calcium pills. And of the 9 randomized studies where fluid milk was added to, 2 showed significant weight gain and showed significant weight loss. In one study funded by a grant from the International Dairy Foods Association, 204 healthy men and women were asked to increase their intake of skim or 1% milk by 3 cups a day for 12 weeks. Those consuming the extra milk gained an average of 1.32 pounds. That's skim milk. What if they fed them the things that Greg Miller's talking about, the cheese and the ice cream? They'd balloon up like cows. At a Dairy Management and Corporation-sponsored meeting in New Orleans in 2002, the Symposium for Dairy Product Components and Weight Regulation. This is the conclusion from Suzanne Barr, an employee of the dairy industry. In conclusion, the data available from randomized trials of dairy products and calcium supplementations provide little support for an effect of reducing body weight or fat mass. But I guarantee you that you will hear advertisement after advertisement about how good dairy products are for weight loss. It's a lie. All right, now they're just going to throw everything out the window. Everything people once believed about nutrition is now false according to the dairy industry. Fat and cholesterol cure heart disease, fat and salt lower blood pressure, and fat and no fiber cure cancer. I'm not kidding you. You'll find this on the internet. Go look it up. This is material from the dairy industry. The dairy industry has teamed up with the National Medical Association to write articles about the role of dairy in helping reduce the risk of heart disease, hypertension, and other serious diseases. Okay, the question I have for you is, who are the National Dairy Association? Who are these people? Who's the National Medical Association? I wanted to know that. I went to look who they were. The National Medical Association promotes the collective interests of physicians and patients of African descent. They promote the interests of African Americans who are lactose intolerant. 90% of them get diarrhea, stomach cramps, and gas when they drink milk. How in the world did they team up with the dairy industry? Unbelievable. But they did. Okay. Studies. This is published by the dairy industry in the American Journal of Hypertension. 67 studies done, 47 proved worth review. The average drop in blood pressure with dairy products was 1.4 millimeters systolic, 0.84 millimeters diastolic. That's it. In our work at our clinic, we get an average drop of blood pressure with similar elevations of blood pressure of 23 over 14 millimeters of mercury in about 48 hours. Colon cancer, complete nonsense. Worldwide, everyone agrees colon cancer is a disease of high fat, high meat intake. They're trying to make a story about how calcium in the milk combines with fat and bile acids produced by the high-fat American diet to negate the cause of colon cancer. It's all a fabrication. Milk is so bad that I would have to call it liquid meat. And I can do that with justification just from simple nutrition tables. If you look at the nutritional content, the macronutrients of milk and one of the leading dairy products, cheese, you see that 68% of the calories from ground chuck are from fat, and 73% of the calories from cheddar cheese are from fat. They're about the same in protein, and they're about the same in cholesterol. It's just liquid meat, that's all it is. Have you ever noticed this? Have you ever noticed that it's women that have trouble giving up dairy? Actually, they give up meat. I think so. I don't think I'm being unfair. I don't think I'm particularly being gender biased. You've observed this. Women have trouble giving up their dairy, their cheese, their ice cream, their yogurt. You know, it's kind of a motherly thing, you know, that milk stuff, kind of a home type thing. And whereas men, it's different, isn't it? You know, us men, we can give up the meat, but not, or the dairy products, but not the meat. No, meat is the stuff of men. It's for hunting and butchering and killing and aggressive behavior. I'm not kidding. The psychological studies show this. Virility and strength and passion and aggressive behavior. That's what real men do. Don't they? Real men eat beef? You got it. So we can't give up our meat. There's a particular anatomical discussion about men that I want to go into with you for a moment. You've heard about how meat eaters have a certain anatomical and physiological qualities, like the sharp teeth and the jaws and the stomach size and the intestine size and so on, about how meat eaters, you know, have sharp teeth and so on, and plant eaters have flat teeth. You heard that whole argument. Let me just take it to one other level, and that has to do with a very important male organ. It's about macho men. Real men. You know, real men, it's about performance. And I really hate to get so basic with you, but it's the end of the program, so you'll probably forget this. But part of that performance, folks, is volume and potency, okay? And volume and potency have to do with a couple of little organs that are attached to the prostate called the seminal vesicles. See, that's where you store the semen in the seminal vesicles. Listen to me carefully. Human men are the only meat-eating animals that have seminal vesicles. All other animals in nature that have seminal vesicles are vegetarians. Okay? We have violated millions of years of evolution. There's your seminal vesicles attached to the prostate right under the bladder. Only vegetarians have seminal vesicles, except for meat-eating man, which some of you assume shouldn't be a vegetarian, but in this group, I think most of you know better. All right, so what's the consequence of violating nature? Well, if your mother violates nature and she eats a lot of meat, what happens is, because of the chemicals of meats and some of the other hormone-producing aspects of meat, what happens is she raises you, grows you in uterus in a very estrogenic environment, and as a result, your penis is smaller and your testicles are smaller. And in many cases, the urethra, which is where the urine is carried, does no longer end at the tip of the penis, it ends at the base of the penis. Hypospadia, it's called. And often you're born with one testicle undescended, which is cryptorchism. That's if your mother thinks meat is good. Now, if you think meat is good, what interesting thing happens is that your ejaculate volume is decreased dramatically. Your sperm content is dropped to about 1/3 of what it should be. Your sperm have shortened lifespan, poor motility, genetic damage, and you suffer from more infertility. And testosterone, which is what really makes a man interested, is 13% higher in vegans than it is in meat eaters, and 8% higher in lacto-ovo-vegetarian, you know what I'm saying. And then, as you get older, what happens? The prostate closes down, you can't urinate. I mean, meat's really good for you, right? Now you can't urinate, and then you get prostate cancer, and then you need to buy the little blue pills because you can't get an erection. Now, isn't meat a manly thing to do? You're impotent. You're impotent. You're infertile as a consequence of aberrant eating habits. It's time to put Elsie out to pasture, folks. Thank you very much.